History is not just a collection of dates and events, it is a river of choices, with each choice creating a new stream that flows into the future. The story of Karbala begins long before the hot sands of that desert. It starts at a critical fork in the river of Islamic history. When the final messenger of God, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, departed from this world, he left behind a community built on justice, compassion, and consultation. He had established a society where the leader was meant to be the most pious, the most just, and the most knowledgeable. Leadership was a sacred trust, a responsibility to serve the people, not to rule over them. This was the foundation he had laid with his own hands. The prophet's vision was clear. He wanted a leadership that mirrored his own example. He wanted a system where the rights of the weakest were protected, and the voice of the common person was heard. This system of governance was known as the Caliphate, meant to be a continuation of his prophetic guidance, but in a political and social form. The early leaders, despite their differences in approach, largely tried to maintain this spirit. The community would consult, they would choose, and the leader would be accountable. It was a revolutionary idea in a world dominated by emperors and kings who claimed divine right to rule. The essence was simple: power belonged to God, and it was entrusted to a leader through the will and well-being of the people. However, this noble path of consultation and merit-based leadership began to face challenges. Human ambition and tribal politics, which Islam had sought to temper, started to re-emerge. The spirit of brotherhood was slowly being eroded by the desire for power and influence. The question of who should lead became a point of contention, not just a matter of pious consultation. What was once a system based on spiritual qualification started to show cracks. The focus began to shift from who is the best for the community to who has the most power to take control. This gradual drift was a quiet betrayal of the prophet's legacy, a subtle but dangerous change that would set the stage for a great tragedy. This shift was not sudden, it was a slow, creeping change. Like a shadow growing longer as the sun sets, the principles of the early community began to recede. The idea that leadership was a heavy burden was replaced by the idea that it was a prize to be won. The values of humility and service were being overshadowed by the glamour of authority and control. This transformation from a leadership of shared responsibility to one of dynastic ambition was the first step on the long and sorrowful road to Karbala. It was here, in the decades following the prophet's passing, that the seeds of conflict were sown, waiting for the right conditions to grow into a confrontation between two opposing worldviews. The delicate system of consultation faced its greatest test with the rise of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. After a period of intense civil strife, Muawiyah consolidated his power and established the Umayyad dynasty. While he was a skilled politician and administrator, his approach to governance marked a dramatic departure from the prophet's model. He moved the capital to Damascus and began to run the state more like a Byzantine or Persian kingdom than the simple, community-focused leadership of Medina. The Caliphate, once a role of spiritual and public service, started to look and feel like a monarchy. Decisions were no longer made in the mosque among the people, but in a palace far from their reach. Muawiyah's most controversial and transformative act was his decision to appoint his own son, Yazid, as his successor. This was a complete break from Islamic tradition. It turned leadership from a public trust into a private inheritance. It was the moment the caliphate was officially converted into a hereditary monarchy. Muawiyah used a combination of political maneuvering, financial incentives, and intimidation to secure pledges of allegiance for his son. This action went against the very principle of shura, or consultation, which was a cornerstone of Islamic governance. The community's right to choose its leader was taken away, replaced by the will of a single ruler. This set a dangerous precedent for the future of the Muslim world. Yazid ibn Muawiyah was a figure who, by all accounts, was unfit for the role of leading the Muslim community. Historical sources, even those not sympathetic to Imam Hussein, describe him as a man given to his own pleasures. He was known for his love of hunting, poetry, and entertainment, but not for his piety, justice, or concern for the religious law. He openly flouted the moral and ethical principles that Islam held dear. To have such a man as the leader, the caliph of the Prophet's community, was unthinkable for those who held the faith in their hearts. He represented the complete opposite of the values the Prophet had spent his life establishing. The appointment of Yazid was not just a political problem, it was a spiritual crisis. It signaled that the leadership of the community was no longer about upholding divine law and justice. Instead, it had become about power for its own sake. Yazid's rule was a symbol of corruption. It was a message that a person could inherit the highest office in the land regardless of their character, their faith, or their competence. This was the ultimate betrayal of the Prophet's legacy. It was an insult to the sacrifices of the early Muslims who had fought to build a society based on morality and righteousness. The stage was now set for a major confrontation. When Yazid took power, he demanded a pledge of allegiance, or bay'ah, from everyone of influence. This pledge was not just a political formality, it was a stamp of religious legitimacy. For Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, to give his pledge would mean endorsing Yazid's rule. It would mean telling the world that a man like Yazid was a rightful leader of the Islamic community. It would be a validation of the corrupt system that had brought him to power. Hussein knew that his silence, or his acceptance, would be interpreted as approval. He understood that his name carried the weight of his grandfather's legacy, and he could not lend that legacy to injustice. Imam Hussein's refusal was not a grab for political power. He was not trying to start a rebellion to make himself king. His stand was entirely based on moral and religious principles. He famously said, "A person like me cannot give a pledge of allegiance to a person like him." This statement was not about personal ego, it was a declaration of principle. It meant that a person who represents the values of the Prophet, truth, justice, compassion, cannot legitimize someone who represents the opposite, corruption, tyranny, and immorality. Hussein saw this as his sacred duty. He had to stand up to protect the true essence of his grandfather's religion from being distorted forever. Hussein's decision was a difficult one. He knew the immense power of the Umayyad state. He knew that refusing Yazid would put his life and the lives of his family in grave danger. He could have chosen an easier path. He could have given the pledge quietly and lived a life of comfort and privilege in Medina. Many advised him to do so, to avoid bloodshed and protect himself. But for Hussein, a life under the shadow of tyranny was not a life worth living. He believed that some principles are more important than life itself. He chose to uphold justice, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had. This stand was a lesson for all of humanity. It teaches us that there are moments in life when we must say no to injustice, regardless of the consequences. Hussein's refusal was a powerful act of non-compliance. It was a statement that one must not be a silent accomplice to wrongdoing. He was not just defending Islam, he was defending the universal human values of dignity, freedom of conscience, and the right to live under a just and moral leadership. His decision was a beacon, showing that one person, armed with nothing but conviction and truth, can challenge the mightiest of empires and leave a legacy that outlives them all. Forced to leave his home, Imam Hussein began his fateful journey. He left the city of his grandfather, Medina, under the cover of night. He could not stay there, as Yazid's governor was under orders to either secure his pledge or take his head. His departure was not that of a warrior seeking a fight, but of a man of principle seeking refuge. He first went to Mecca, the sacred sanctuary where bloodshed was forbidden. He hoped to find a safe haven there and to explain his position to the thousands of pilgrims who would gather for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. He wanted the world to know why he could not and would not endorse a corrupt ruler like Yazid. While in Mecca, letters began to pour in from the people of Kufa, a city in modern-day Iraq. They wrote thousands of letters begging Imam Hussein to come and be their leader. They pledged their loyalty and promised to support him against the tyranny of the Umayyads. They said they had no leader and would not pray behind Yazid's appointed governor. To test their sincerity, Hussein sent his trusted cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil, to Kufa. Initially, the reports from Muslim were overwhelmingly positive. Thousands of people came to pledge their allegiance to Hussein through his cousin. It seemed as though the people of Kufa were ready to stand for justice. Believing in their promises, Imam Hussein decided to make the journey from Mecca to Kufa. He knew the risks. He was warned by many that the people of Kufa were known for their fickle loyalties. But Hussein felt a responsibility to answer the call of those who sought his guidance. He did not want to be the one who turned his back on people asking for help. So, with his family, his sisters, his wives, and his young children, and a small band of loyal companions, he set out across the vast, unforgiving desert. This was not the journey of an army marching to conquer, but of a family moving towards what they hoped would be a supportive community. However, the situation in Kufa changed dramatically and tragically. Yazid appointed a new, ruthless governor named Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad entered the city and immediately began a campaign of terror and intimidation. He used threats, bribery, and brutal force to crush the nascent uprising. He arrested and executed Muslim ibn Aqil, who was abandoned by the same thousands who had just pledged their loyalty. Fear spread through Kufa like a disease. By the time Imam Hussein was approaching the city, the support he had been promised had vanished. The gates of Kufa were closed to him, and the people who had invited him were now silent, paralyzed by fear. Hussein and his small caravan were intercepted before they could reach Kufa. An army under the command of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi blocked their path. They were forced to divert from their route and were led into the barren, desolate plains of Karbala on the second day of the month of Muharram. The name itself, Karbala, is said to mean land of sorrow and affliction. As soon as they made camp, a larger army, sent by Ibn Ziyad, arrived and surrounded them. The first order given to the commander of that army, Umar ibn Sa'd, was to prevent Hussein and his family from accessing the nearby Euphrates River. The river flowed just a short distance away, its water shimmering under the hot desert sun, but it was now completely out of reach. The siege began, and honestly, the most painful trial was thirst. The water supply in Hussein's camp quickly ran out. The desert sun was merciless, beating down on the tents and scorching the earth. The cries of the children for water became a constant, heart-wrenching sound. Imagine for a moment the agony of a parent, unable to provide a single drop of water to their thirsty child. This was the situation for Imam Hussein, his family, and his companions. The enemy used thirst as a weapon, hoping to break their spirit and force them into submission. They thought that by inflicting this cruel form of suffering, Hussein would finally give up and pledge allegiance to Yazid. But the thirst did not break their resolve. It only strengthened their conviction. The small camp of around 72 men, along with the women and children, faced an army of thousands. They were completely cut off, with no hope of rescue or escape. Yet, not a single person considered abandoning Hussein. Their loyalty was not to a political leader, but to a principle. They saw in Hussein the embodiment of truth and righteousness. They chose to endure the agony of thirst and the certainty of death rather than bow to a tyrant. The days in Karbala were a testament to human endurance and the power of faith in the face of unimaginable hardship. The nights in Karbala were spent in prayer and preparation. Imam Hussein gathered his companions on the night before the battle, the night of Ashura. He extinguished the lamps and told them that the enemy only wanted him. He freed them from their pledge of allegiance and urged them to take the women and children and escape under the cover of darkness. He told them they were free to leave, with no blame upon them, but in a profound display of loyalty and love, not a single person left. They wept and declared that they would never abandon him. They said they would rather be killed and resurrected 1,000 times than leave him to face the enemy alone. The morning of the 10th day of Muharram, known as Ashura, dawned upon the land of Karbala. It was a day that would forever be etched in the memory of humanity. The small band of Imam Hussein's followers stood ready to face the massive army of Yazid. They knew they stood no chance of victory in a military sense. Their goal was not to win the battle, but to win the war of principles. One by one, they went out into the battlefield, each one a hero writing their own chapter in this epic of sacrifice. They fought with a courage that stunned their enemies. They were not fighting for wealth or land, they were fighting for God, for justice, and for the honor of their leader. Among the first to sacrifice was Ali Akbar, the 18-year-old son of Imam Hussein. He resembled his great-grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad, in his looks and his manner. When he rode into the battlefield, it was as if the Prophet himself had returned. He fought with incredible bravery, but the thirst had taken its toll. He returned to his father for a final farewell, saying, "Father, the thirst is killing me." Hussein, with tears in his eyes, could offer no water, only the promise of quenching his thirst in paradise from the hands of his grandfather. Ali Akbar returned to the fight and was martyred, his body brutally cut down by the enemy, a devastating blow to his father's heart. The most poignant story of bravery is that of Abbas ibn Ali, Imam Hussein's half-brother. He was the standard-bearer of the camp and the protector of the women and children. The cries of the young children for water were unbearable for him. He took a water skin and rowed towards the Euphrates River. He fought his way through the enemy ranks and managed to reach the water. He filled the water skin, but he did not drink a single drop himself. He could not bring himself to quench his own thirst while his master and the children were suffering. On his way back, he was ambushed. His arms were cut off, but he held the water skin with his teeth, desperate to get it back to the camp. But arrows pierced the skin, and the water spilled onto the sand. Abbas fell, a martyr to loyalty and love. The ultimate symbol of innocence and suffering was the martyrdom of Abdullah, Imam Hussein's 6-month-old infant son, also known as Ali Asghar. The baby was dying of thirst in his mother's arms. Hussein, in a final plea to the humanity of the enemy, brought the baby to the battlefield. He held him up and said, "This baby has done no wrong. If you think I am guilty, he is not. Give him some water." He appealed to their conscience, hoping to awaken some sense of compassion. But instead of water, a 3-pronged arrow was fired from the enemy ranks. The arrow struck the tiny throat of the baby, pinning him to his father's arm. The infant was martyred in his father's hands, a symbol of the absolute cruelty of the oppressors. After witnessing the martyrdom of every single one of his male companions and family members, Imam Hussein was left to stand alone. He had lost his sons, his brothers, his nephews, and his loyal friends. His body was weak from thirst and covered in wounds from the arrows that had rained down upon him. Yet, his spirit was unbroken. He stood as a lone mountain against a storm of thousands. He was the last man standing, the final defender of truth in a field filled with injustice. His loneliness on that day is a powerful symbol of what it often feels like to stand for what is right in a world that has gone wrong. He bid a final, heartbreaking farewell to the women and children in his tent, especially his sister, Zainab, and his 6th son, Ali Zain al-Abidin. He entrusted the future of his message to them. He knew that the battle on the field was about to end, but the battle for truth had to continue. He mounted his horse and rode towards the enemy for his final confrontation. He was not just fighting a physical battle, he was delivering his final sermon with his sword and his blood. He fought with the courage of a lion, a final defiant roar against the forces of tyranny, reminding them of who he was, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. The enemy, despite their overwhelming numbers, was hesitant to be the one to strike the final blow. They knew the spiritual status of the man they were fighting. They knew he was the beloved grandson of the prophet they claimed to follow. But their orders were clear and their hearts were hardened. They attacked him from all sides, a pack of wolves descending upon a wounded lion. Arrows rained down on him, spears pierced his body, and swords struck him until he finally fell from his horse. Even as he lay on the ground, wounded and dying, his thoughts were of his family and the future of his grandfather's community. Imam Hussein's final moments were spent in prayer. Lying on the hot sands of Karbala, he prostrated to his Lord one last time. His martyrdom was not a defeat, it was the ultimate victory. By giving his life, he ensured that the difference between truth and falsehood would be clear for all time. He refused to legitimize a corrupt ruler, and his death became a permanent indictment of tyranny. He taught the world that it is better to die with dignity on your feet than to live with humiliation on your knees. His final sacrifice was the seal on a timeless message of courage, honor, and unwavering commitment to divine principles. The tragedy of Karbala did not end with the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. What followed was an act of unimaginable cruelty. The enemy army descended upon Hussein's camp, looting the tents and terrorizing the bereaved women and children. They set the tents on fire, leaving the prophet's granddaughters without even a roof over their heads. The bodies of the martyrs were trampled by horses, an act of extreme disrespect. The heads of Imam Hussein and his companions were severed and raised on spears. This was not just a battle, it was a massacre designed to spread fear and extinguish any spark of opposition to Yazid's rule. The oppressors thought they had won a total victory. The surviving women and children, led by Hussein's sister, Sayyida Zainab, and his son, Ali Zain al-Abidin, were taken as captives. They were chained and paraded through the streets, from Karbala to Kufa, and then all the way to Yazid's palace in Damascus. This humiliating journey was meant to be a public spectacle, a demonstration of the Umayyads' absolute power. The captors wanted to show the world what happens to those who dare to defy the ruler. They thought that by parading the prophet's family in chains, they would silence all dissent and cement their authority. They believed they were parading a defeated family. However, they had made a great miscalculation. They had not accounted for the courage and eloquence of Sayyida Zainab. She was the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima al-Zahra, and she carried their strength in her spirit. In the marketplace of Kufa, and in the very court of Yazid in Damascus, Zainab turned her captivity into a platform. In chains, she spoke with a voice that was free. She delivered powerful sermons that exposed the crimes of the rulers and reminded the people of who the captives truly were, the family of the Prophet Muhammad. She recounted the events of Karbala, ensuring the truth would not be buried. Zainab's words were like thunderclaps that awakened the conscience of the people. In Yazid's own court, in front of his courtiers and foreign ambassadors, she fearlessly condemned him. She told him, "By God, you will never be able to erase our memory, nor will you be able to extinguish our revelation." She transformed the narrative from one of defeat to one of moral victory. She ensured that the message of Hussein's sacrifice was not lost. Zainab became the voice of Karbala, the messenger of the martyrs. Her courage proved that the fight for justice does not end when the warriors fall. It is carried on by the survivors who speak the truth. The story of Karbala is not confined to a single day or a specific piece of land. It is a story that transcends time, geography, and religion. It is an eternal narrative of truth against falsehood, justice against oppression, and the few against the many. The sacrifice of Imam Hussein and his companions became a symbol of hope for all oppressed people everywhere. It teaches a fundamental lesson that the victory of the sword is temporary, but the victory of principle is everlasting. Yazid won the battle on that day, but Hussein won the war for the soul of humanity. His legacy has outlived empires and continues to inspire millions. The message of Karbala is profoundly universal. It speaks to anyone who has ever faced a moral dilemma. It asks us, what do you do when you are told to compromise your principles for personal gain or safety? What do you do when you see injustice and are powerful enough to speak out, even if it comes at a great cost? Hussein's stand was for human dignity. He refused to live under a system that stripped people of their rights and their moral compass. His revolution was not one of violence, but one of conscience. It is a call to every individual to be a guardian of justice in their own lives and in their own communities. Today, in the year 2025, the world is still filled with Yazids. There are still tyrants who rule through fear, leaders who prioritize power over people, and systems that perpetuate injustice. The spirit of Hussein is needed now more than ever. It is found in the heart of every activist who speaks truth to power, every journalist who exposes corruption, every person who refuses to be a silent bystander to oppression. Karbala teaches us that numbers do not determine what is right. You can be part of a small minority and still be on the side of truth. It gives courage to those who feel small and powerless against large oppressive forces. Ultimately, Karbala is a story of hope. It demonstrates that even in the darkest of times, the light of human principle cannot be extinguished. The blood of the martyrs of Karbala nourished the tree of freedom and justice for generations to come. It serves as an annual reminder during the days of Muharram for people to reflect on their own lives. Are we standing with Hussein, or are we silent in the camp of Yazid? The choice is not just a historical one, it is a daily one. It is the choice to live with integrity, to stand for the oppressed, and to build a world where truth, justice, and human dignity are not just ideals, but a lived reality for all.